Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Thanks for agreeing to talk with me today.
Absolutely.
So, I know you don't want to talk too much about specifics where you are, and I totally respect that. But can you tell me a little bit about what course of study you are in, and what interested you in this field?
Yeah, so I'm in a master's program for mental health and counseling.
Hmm.
Um, it's I won't say like where, but it's
Hmm.
a KCREP accredited program like Antioch. I would say like so I have a little bit of an unusual background. My undergraduate degree is in Homeland Security, and I have another master's degree in international security. I When I went to DC, it just like wasn't the right place for me. And so I was like trying to think like, what other fields would work for me? What works with my personality? I tend to be somewhat of like a sensitive, like empathetic or emotional kind of person. And I've always just like kind of had an interest, and it just kind of felt like a natural second choice for me. I do have like in full disclosure, I have some health issues. So I did have to also take that into account. And so something that appealed to me about counseling was that there's like some a sense of like self-control, and I can
Hmm.
have my own practice and like do stuff like that that makes it a little bit easier for me to manage with health issues.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Oh, that's great. Just kind of what interested you in it, and
Yeah.
what did you think what did you think the role of a counselor was when you started training to
Yeah.
become one?
So I think like, I mean, in my mind, it was like kind of like untangling things with people, like helping people kind of work things out within themselves and like for themselves. I take a very like client-centered approach in the sense that like they are the masters of their own experience, they are the experts of their own lives, like that kind of thing. I don't think I really thought like enough, I'd say, about like the different theoretical aspects of that, but yeah, I really just kind of took it as like emotional support and working with people through issues. I mean, obviously you have things like assessment, and you have things that are like, like crisis counseling and stuff like that. But like for me, long term, that was not what I wanted to do. I definitely was primarily interested in like, the one-on-one, just
Mhm.
classic counseling experience.
Mhm.
I like working with people one-on-one. I feel, that's where I like thrive.
Mhm. So working as a support for that individual. Mhm.
Mhm. And just being a safe space, I just feel like people need it, the relationship is so foundational. I mean, I think there are studies that show that there's really nothing more important than
Mhm.
the therapeutic alliance. It doesn't really matter what approach you're taking if you don't have that, sense of trust and sense of dignity, you're
Mhm.
not really going to go anywhere. So for me, it was just being able to be that person, somebody that, people can trust and,
Mhm.
go into some of those deeper, darker, whatever things that they need to go into.
And so at what point or did you start to feel like the program was offering a different perspective on that than what you were expecting? And what was that like for you?
So it didn't really take very long, to be totally honest. I'd say like within the first year, I kind of figured it out. I think that was like, I don't know, by the time I took the cross-cultural counseling course, which I'm sure like you have, because all these like, all of these programs are standardized. Like that's one thing I do want to emphasize is like what I'm talking about, it's very applicable. Like where I go to school doesn't really matter because there's so much standardization in a field like this when we have licensure.
Mhm.
But I think the cross-cultural counseling class was like that was the wake-up call for me. Like that was like, wow, this is like a little bit more than I realized, because you would see like little snippets here and there in each class.
Mhm.
Um, like sometimes I would like hear people say stuff and I'm like, what is going on? I feel like I'm in the twilight zone.
Like, can
And
you give me
then
an example of what you mean when you say snippets? Like little ways that
yeah,
they would phrase things, or what was it?
it's just, like critical social justice and that just entire like ideology sort of treated as like, I don't know, like the Bible almost, or like it just
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
it just, it's not like up for debate. It's
Mhm.
something. And then there's also this like assumption, I think, and that's like one of the first things I noticed is that people will talk negatively about basically anyone who doesn't agree with critical social
Mhm.
justice.
Mhm.
And there's like this implication, I think, that they don't even like it doesn't cross their mind that
Mhm.
somebody could like be a normal person and like be in this program and like be perfectly kind and perfectly normal and like not necessarily agree with everything that they say. It's like they just assume that if you're there, you must agree because, or if they like you, they must agree because they have this like picture in their mind that somebody that objects to it, it's like very mean and like angry and bigoted and like all these different things. So it's just like this sort of casual, like casual throwaway things like Trump supporters, like that kind of stuff that just kind of adds up when I start noticing like like why are we so judgmental and like kind of cruel to people? I just felt, that's not our role as counselors, is to have like such a I don't know like what the word would be. I don't want to call it like snooty, but just kind of like looking down upon other people who have different life experiences than us.
Like judgmental.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, was it mostly students or teachers that you were hearing this from? Where were you getting these like this bit of the atmosphere? What was that coming from?
Yeah, so I would say it's, majority students. It's definitely, it's like a mix, okay? With the professors, I'd say, most of my professors are wonderful. And honestly, like most of my peers are wonderful people. Like I have no issue with them at a personal level. It's more about the ideology and like the general environment. But they're definitely professors that like crossed a lot of lines and said some pretty messed up stuff, to be honest. So I like cross-cultural counseling, for example, like that was wild for me. I was like, what is going on? This can't be normal, because it was just like an entire class of nothing but what I felt like was pretty hateful. Not it didn't like view people with dignity, I guess is like the way that I see it. It viewed some people with dignity and some people without, and I was very uncomfortable with that.
Okay, so it started out, this was early on in the course, in the program, that you took this cross-cultural counseling class?
Yeah, I would say, gosh, it was probably like 6 to 12 months in, so early-ish. And I also want to add that like I've been in this program for a little bit longer because again, I have health issues and I've had to take a couple leaves of absence.
Okay.
So this was like maybe 2 years ago.
Okay, so is it a 3-year program and you're about 2 years in right now?
Yeah, so it's like normally a 2 to 3, and I'm like 3-ish.
Okay.
I'm almost done. I just have to do my I've done my practicum and I need to do my internship. That's it basically. So, but I'm taking another leave because I have another surgery coming up. So it's just like, it just takes me a little bit longer, but I do want to add that in terms of like the length of time when I say it was 2 years ago.
Right. Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I've taken a couple of leaves during my program as well. So this was, I'm understanding that it was kind of an atmosphere you were picking up on and it was unfamiliar to you. So you're hearing the way that people are talking about things and from this critical social justice lens, and that was sort of new to you. So it was strange, but you're just hearing it all around, little judgmental phrases and the way that people are talking about things. And then you start this course and it felt more like it rose to the surface and was more blatant. Can you give some examples of what was talked about in this course that you found disturbing?
Yeah, just like on the premise of like the entire content, I would say, it takes all of the like critical social justice, like just slammed like straight through in like every context, everything from like fat studies to, gender to this to that, like it was, all encompassing. There was like no aspect. But like early on, like the first assignment that we had to like go through, the addressing framework, age, whatever, all your different identity markers. That was our first assignment, which first of all, for me, I was like, I'm not like comfortable. Like, why do you need to know about my sexuality? Like, why do you need to know about, my, excuse me, my like class, stuff like that. I felt like, this isn't something that I necessarily want to share with people. I'm a little bit of a private person.
So you were being asked to say these things to the class or to your fellow students? You were asked to actually write down your addressing characteristics for them?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And like the first assignment, I actually got points off because I didn't like adequately, I put like, oh, I'm white, but I didn't put like I'm white and as such I am privileged. Like I didn't like adequately acknowledge my privilege. And so at first I was like, oh, and then I went back and I looked at the assignment and it was not really clear that that was like an expectation. It was sort of like an unsaid expectation that somehow everyone else knew and I didn't know. And so that was like when I first realized like, maybe there's something else that like I'm not prepared for, I'm missing. I think at first I really kind of blamed it on the fact that I come from a very different academic background.
Okay.
It was primarily, I mean, it was Homeland Security. There's a lot of like people in the military, a lot of men. It was not oriented towards this stuff at all.
Okay.
And so I had never really encountered it. I honestly thought that like a lot of this stuff was almost like a meme or like a stereotype that didn't exist. And then I was like,
Okay.
oh, I guess it does.
So you had some concept of the social justice mindset, but you thought that it was like you said, a meme. So you weren't taking it very seriously as a real thing that you were going to encounter in this program.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
But yeah, and like other things, like for example, our like main assignment we had to do, it was
Mhm.
basically like you're supposed to take a group of people, whatever, that you have some sort of bias against, and you're
Mhm.
supposed to do like your whole project is like to immerse yourself in this group that you have a bias against and like learn and you know reframe or whatever. I mean, that's like what the assignment is on paper. For me, I had me and one other person, we did religion. Because for me, I'm
Okay.
not religious, and that was like something that I thought, okay, well, maybe I should probably engage with that a little bit more and try to learn like where people who experience that are coming from. But all of the other groups were, it was Trump supporters, conservatives, and cops were the other groups.
Oh, okay.
Um and not, by the way, like at the end when we had our final presentations, there was no like immersion and reframing and anything like that. It was basically just like a presentation about why these people suck.
Oh
You
my
know,
gosh.
it was pretty, it was also the day after George Floyd died. And
Mhm.
so it was like I mean, a 5-hour class. They kept it, I mean, it didn't
Oh,
matter
wow.
what you had to do, if you could have other classes, whatever. Like we were gonna have to be there for 5 hours.
Wow.
And
Wow. So
it
you
was our
really
final
they held you
presentation.
there for that.
Yeah. And like
Wow.
everyone had to go around and like cry and like do all that stuff. And I'm like, oh gosh, like this is not for me, like for class, what
Mhm.
class is meant to be. Like that, you know, I don't have anything against that, of course. I just think that you know, that's not like the circumstance in which, you know, maybe we should be engaging in that kind of like discussion. But it was just such a huge disappointment to me to see like it not only like the students do that, but the professor being like so praiseworthy of just such judgment and like such to me it's cruelty. I mean, I don't think it's okay to think like, okay, well, conservatives are disgusting, or you know,
Mhm.
Trump supporters are the worst and they're evil and they don't deserve our help. And I
Mhm.
mean, it's
Mhm.
getting to the point where I feel like there's not really mental health care for people who don't like um meet the definition of like marginalized or something that
Mhm.
you know, or their ability to like reframe it. Like either
Mhm.
you're already there or you're willing to go there, but like if you don't share that, it's almost like you're not welcome in therapy anymore. And that
Yeah.
really concerns me, really, because
Yeah.
I mean that's a half the country. People, you
Yeah.
know, you can't be doing that. That
Mm.
and cops, you know, it
Uh-huh.
was like very hateful towards cops. And I just felt like, you know, nobody learned anything. I didn't see any genuine attempt at trying to like engage with these populations. I think there is a lot to be said about, you know,
Right.
the experience of Trump supporters and like the amount of hate, you know, that they experience on like a day-to-day basis, frankly, from these same people.
Mhm.
And what that does, you know, to you, like to your, you know, to your psyche and like your soul. I don't think people really appreciate that, like, you know, Trump supporters are human too. Like they have feelings, and it
Mhm.
can really suck to have everyone hate you all the time.
Mhm.
And instead of kind of engaging with stuff like that or engaging with the challenges of being a cop, it was like,
Mhm.
you know, they suck the end.
Mhm.
So that was really disappointing for me.
Mhm. So they were directly supporting this. The teacher was supporting the idea that there was just blanket condemnation for what they call Trump supporters and for cops as well. And
And
from
conservatives
from
and
the
yeah.
teacher.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean,
Wow.
frankly,
Okay.
it was like so disappointing to me too. I'll be honest that like this is probably one of the most radical, cruel professors that I had.
Mhm.
And like she became the program head, like
Oh,
the department
wow.
head.
Okay.
So it was like,
Wow.
wow, like that was another like red pill for me. It was like, okay, that this is what
Wow.
they want. Like
Yeah.
this isn't considered bad. This is actually considered like exactly what they want. So that was
Okay.
really eye-opening for me too.
Wow. So was most of the concerning content political and racial for you?
Yeah, it's definitely, it was primarily political.
Mhm.
Um a lot of, I'd say, like male hate, which is interesting. I
Okay,
think this is
okay.
like definitely a female attracting field. So some of
Mhm.
my classes would be all women. And, people are like, oh, I'm not going to read this because it was like written by some white man or something like that. And
Okay,
it's just a
wow.
lot of like those, it's just so many throwaway comments that I don't even think people realize they're making. I think they're so used to living in this bubble where like this is just something you say, that it doesn't cross their mind that like maybe not everyone in the class is going to be comfortable with that. And like sometimes they would say things that would like personally offend me. They would hurt my feelings because they would
Mhm,
be directed towards things that I think and like things that I feel, my own experiences.
mhm.
But I just keep my mouth shut. I really learned to just kind of keep my mouth shut in the program and hope for the best.
So there was a pretty strong atmosphere of this kind of language and talk being okay. Was it surprising to you that you were around future counselors
Yeah.
that would talk this way about people?
Yeah, it really bothers it to me, and it still bothers me. It disturbs me so much. At this point, I have like a lot more like compassion now that I sort of understand the origins and the thought process and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, at the time I didn't fully understand what was going on. And it
Mhm,
really it
mhm,
was disturbing. And it also just, I mean, to be honest, it hurt my feelings because I'm
mhm.
like, okay, well, do you think this about me? You don't even know that I think this, but you're talking about these people like you hate them. I'm sitting right here.
Yeah,
But it doesn't even cross anyone's mind that like anyone could have a different opinion. And so
yeah,
they just say it because of course I would agree.
yeah. It that just strikes me as really stunning that here you're around people who are training to be professionals that can sit with and help people with all their diverse individual perspectives and experiences and thoughts, and yet they can so callously talk about other people in such a dehumanizing way. That's really
Yeah.
shocking to me.
And like even for like the, quote unquote marginalized groups that they would talk about, like I
Yeah.
felt like they were engaging in a lot of stereotyping.
Mhm,
Um, there's a lot of like projecting or like overly focusing on
mhm,
identity things and
mhm,
like they'll pull the intersectionality and like, oh, this and that, like we're not just focused on race, we're not just focused on gender, but like in
mhm,
the end it's all kind of the same thing. Even if you like do the intersections, whatever,
mhm,
it's still very much looking at like a group of people in like a certain
mhm,
way. Like they'd
mhm.
say things like um I don't know, like an Asian client might won't look you in the eye or something like that, or
Oh,
they will have like this perspective or that perspective, or a a black client would have this perspective. And I'm just,
mhm.
to me, like that is
Very
not how I
stereotyped.
want to approach people.
Yeah.
I don't want to approach people. If somebody comes to me, if I have like a black male client that comes to me and says like I want to talk about my race, like okay, that's one thing, but to
Mhm,
project it upon them like
mhm,
against their will, to me it just seems like
mhm.
the antithesis of what counseling is supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And so one of the things that the program that I was in talked about was they were training us that counselors' main role was to be advocates for social justice, activists, and social change agents. And so these were words that were being used. Did you hear similar stuff? And were they similarly reframing what you felt like the role of the counselor was in your program?
Absolutely. That's actually one of the actually now that like I think about it, it's one of the first things I noticed was like when they listed the different like roles and stuff, like activist was in
Mhm,
there. And I
mhm,
thought, like, who are you to tell me like what I have to do? Like I
mhm,
could do whatever I want. That's not my job. And you can't tell me like what I have to, you know, push and do that kind of stuff. But the
yeah,
way they frame it is it's very insidious where like you're not doing your duty as a counselor. Like you don't have the counselor ethos if you don't do it, which I
mhm,
don't agree with. But yeah, actually I have a quote from one of my lectures. It's like scholarship and professional practice is quote designed to change societal values, structures, policies, and practices such that the disadvantaged or marginalized groups gain increased access to these tools of self-determination. So they kind of flip it where it's like, well, if you want to help people, you have to do this because this is like the way to do that, which is, to me, just one perspective. It's not like the perspective.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. So will you read the first part of that quote one more time?
Yeah, so it's work, so scholarship and professional practice
Mhm.
is designed to change societal values, structures, policies, and practices.
Wow, okay, so and by scholarship, are they talking specifically about the counseling work that work in
Mhm.
the program? Wow, designed to change societal structures. Wow. That's interesting.
Hmm.
So that's something that I have really wrestled with this program, is that it's well, it's not only ideological, but even if you remove ideology from it, it's sociological. I mean, they're really talking about sociology,
Hmm.
and they have one sociological perspective. And even if we just go neutral on that, and we don't say whether we think that they're right or wrong, it's just that maybe they're right. Let's just say that they're right. How does that translate to the counselor who's working with individuals? It just seems like then you're using people as a means to an end. It's not, it fundamentally changes the role of what you're doing with your clients.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. And to me, that's like just a complete violation of
Yeah.
the autonomy and the dignity of a client. Like that's not, people are coming to us because they have personal
Mhm.
issues, they have emotional issues. Like, sure, there's lots of different factors that go into that. There's social factors, there's environmental factors,
Yeah.
all these different things. But like when it comes down to it, like it is about the person. At
Right.
least this is my perspective. And this is what I thought I was getting myself into with counseling, is that it was, a personal endeavor. It is something that you can't like impose upon somebody in
Mhm.
such a way.
Yeah, and with that in mind, you're talking about all the contexts that you might find a person in. People have their own social situations and experiences, and I, for me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would be supportive of some kind of multicultural training. I don't know if that would be the word I would use, but some version of that for counseling students. I could see a version of that that would make a lot of sense, just not this version. Do you have a similar take on this? And what do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like again, like there's nothing. I think this is like kind of the challenge with the words, is that like if like what multicultural counseling
Yeah,
means, or like
yeah,
it means something really specific. It
it
does
does.
not just mean like incorporating different cultures and
Yeah,
respecting them. So
yeah, yeah.
like so I agree with
That's a
like it
great point.
in yeah.
Yeah.
So but that's like again like the bait and switch. I think people don't get that.
Mhm.
I think a lot of students are kind of taking it at face value, and they're not kind of understanding the bigger picture, or like all
Yeah.
of these different things that are like underlying. There are so many underlying assumptions
Mhm.
of this thought that is just kind of taken for granted, as if it goes unsaid, but
Right.
it's the foundation upon which all of this other stuff is built. So
Mhm.
it does concern me.
And you make such a good point about language. That's one of the things. It's really Orwellian, that the wordplay here, where, uh, for instance, the phrase social justice. I think that it sounds like it means one thing, but it's actually a very specific meaning that you don't necessarily know just by looking at the words. Just like multiculturalism, it sounds like something vague, and you know it has a vaguely positive connotation, but it actually has a specific meaning within the field, or within this training practice. And so I know you've done a lot of reading about this and a lot of study on your own. What thoughts do you have about the origins of this, and how this is being taught in schools?
Yeah, so I can say a lot about it. I'll start first of all with Daryl Wing Sue, because he's
Okay.
a big driver of this in
Mhm.
counseling. So
Yeah.
Daryl Wing Sue has been kind of at this for a long time. I mean, this goes back to like the 80s. I think that's
Mhm.
also what makes this difficult, is because it's not just like something new. It's been
Mhm.
building in academia for like a really long time.
And I'll say that
Um,
that was the book that I shared a little bit of. His book was used in my counseling program as well. So yeah,
he's like, I think the godfather, I guess, of like multicultural counseling, or whatever you want to call it.
didn't
I
he?
mean,
He's the one who informed the KCREP cultural competency standards. Mhm.
which is another thing. I actually have a quote that I pulled from his expectations that says, quote, psychologists aspire to recognize and understand historical and contemporary experiences with power, privilege, and oppression. As such, they seek to address institutional barriers and related inequities, disproportionalities, and disparities of law enforcement, administration of criminal justice, education, mental health, and other systems. They seek to promote justice, human rights, and access to quality and equitable mental and behavioral health services.
Mhm.
So like, to me, it's like they start with this one thing and then they put as such, as if like that's the conclusion that like, is required to be drawn. And then I'm also very uncomfortable with like all this different stuff, it's turned into not just counseling. We have to fight law enforcement. We have to deal with the administration of criminal justice. And like,
Yeah.
I also think it's just on like a practical level when it comes to counselors it's overwhelming for
Yeah.
people to feel like they have like all of this like duty.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I have, I mean, the way I would characterize it, and this is just for me, is that like, I mean, he's basically, honestly, like he's dialectically transformed the field of counseling.
Mhm.
So, and I think he's actually quite aware of this when I read his work. He has articles like The Challenge of White Dialectics, adopting a quote critical ideological framework. He talks about counseling being the quote handmaiden of the status quo and the quote transmitters of society's values.
Oh,
So
wow.
I think there's something in there where
The
there's almost
transmitter
this,
of society's values. That's interesting because that relates directly to their agents of social change. Like that's using counselors for their access to clients in order to impose change on the way that people think. So asking counselors to manipulate people's minds.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, just kind of coming out and saying so much. It's all this stuff's kind of like buried in like mountains and mountains of like academic stuff,
Yeah.
but it's all kind of the same stuff. I mean, they have like principles, social justice work, like self-examination, like that's
Mhm.
it doesn't sound bad in itself,
Right.
but like it in context,
Right.
it's something very specific.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, did you have, I mean, I guess you did, because I saw your video that you had like those weekly reflection journals that you had to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And that seems like it's a psychological tactic in order to break you down. I mean, I know that sounds dramatic, but after experiencing that and reading about this being used, I really don't, I really believe that that's part of it. That's what that process is breaking down any resistance that you have um, and getting your buy-in.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's also to pull, like
Mhm.
areas where you might have like sensitivities,
Mhm.
like where they could poke and prod and like
Mhm.
find the places where it's gonna get
Mhm.
to you. I think, I mean, that's kind of the goal. You want to emotionally, like part of it is kind of like getting in emotionally with people,
Mhm.
and that's kind of how you do it. And I think with counselors specifically, like it attracts the kind of people who um we want to do good. Like
Yeah.
we like people, we want to help people.
Mhm.
We tend to have like a little bit of a like a point of view that I think is exploitable,
Mhm.
like a personality, like an empathetic personality that's
Mhm.
excuse me, really exploitable.
Right.
um Excuse me, sorry.
No, that's a really good point. And something I see as kind of a cascade, like a domino effect, is that we are trained using these tactics and these techniques, like the sort of struggle session um, of the journals and the discussing your feelings and knowing that you're going to have difficult emotions and whatnot. And then we are basically being asked to perform that same thing with our clients by broaching
Hmm.
race and by talking about culture in this particular way and marginalization and privilege and sort of breaking people down in the same way that we are broken down in this program.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it's pretty obvious to me that that's like absolutely the intention. I mean, it's not so
mhm,
much in their minds. I think it's, they're going to help us see better, us
mhm,
help us be the change makers, and then we can help other people be the change
mhm,
makers.
mhm.
But like in context, it's something just, very insidious.
Yeah. So how do you what would you recommend to clients at this point, to people who want to see a therapist or a counselor?
Yeah. This is hard. I think do your homework. Psychology Today, like you can look at people's blurbs and kind of see like the approach that they take. If,
Mhm,
they're coming right out and saying like they take a multicultural social justice approach and like that's not something you want, then
mhm,
maybe find another counselor.
mhm,
I think it just depends. I feel like, I mean, it's a little bit easier to find, I'd say, older counselors,
mhm,
like those that have not been educated recently. I think this is like really quite a push for like recent graduates and stuff like that. But I mean, ultimately it's kind of like embedded into the field. It's embedded into our, our core values are like we have multicultural competence expectations or cultural competence, competencies. But yeah, I don't really, I feel really negative about this, honestly. Like, this is what's really difficult for me. It's like, I feel like I don't even know how much I can recommend counseling to some people. It makes me really uncomfortable. It makes me worried. I know that most people mean good. I mean, I totally understand that. And I don't have anything against like almost any counselor or anything like that. But there's also just this element where it becomes so insidious that you don't realize that something could be going on. I think it's like framed very virtuously. And so it doesn't like connect with people who are like perfectly kind and wonderful people, but it doesn't like connect what is actually going on. And like, I also want to add like the pretty obvious goal, and like they describe this throughout, I mean, what he writes, Gerald Wing Sue, I mean, throughout my program, all of this stuff, like the goal is quote, critical consciousness. Like that is the thing that is very specific.
Yes.
Like that is, like a Marxist utopian consciousness, you're a James Lindsay fan. I'm like a James Lindsay devotee. I've learned so much from him, and I recommend to anyone who wants to learn about this stuff and wants like an easy entry point. New Discourses is definitely like where to start, because he does make it easy to understand. But it's something really specific. And like the goal of critical consciousness is not just so that you have this perspective that like you're seeing, like you adopt a standpoint perspective and you have, you understand like the holistic, as they would call it, like holistic systems approach. It's not just that, like praxis is a part of that. So you have to have the consciousness, and then you have to go and do the work. And so those things are like inseparable. So when they want us to do these things, and when they tell us we need to go be the change makers and stuff like that, like they're talking about something, and they're deriving it from something like very, very specific that I don't feel like is fully understood by most people. To me, that feels like a bait and switch, because I don't think that most of my classmates are sitting there being like, yeah, I want like full-on Marxist consciousness, but that's kind of what's being put forth in these programs in general. I mean, it's almost like you have to have achieved critical consciousness in order to meet the expectations of being a counselor. Like that is like a, that is what a competency would be. So, that's concerning to me.
So development of that critical consciousness so that you can go and help your clients to develop that same critical consciousness.
So I just recommend people, be mindful of that if you're still in school, to pay attention to such things.
What does this mean for you with your career? What do you think? What are you going to do?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I don't think I'm going to get licensed. To be totally honest with you, I do want to graduate. I want to do, I mean, I guess you would call it like consulting or like, like casual counseling. I don't feel comfortable being licensed. I think it would violate like my ethics. I mean, it's really, really rough to say, and it might sound extreme to some people. I promise you, I can like back this up in like more extended amounts of time. But it's like, it's not even counseling. It's not like counseling with Marxist elements in it. It's like the entire, like counseling has been dialectically transformed. So you only have the abstract idea of counseling left, but the particulars are gone. So it's just like, it appears to be counseling, but it's not at all. There's no counseling left. So that really, it just doesn't sit right with me. It feels manipulative. It feels cruel. I don't feel comfortable. I mean, for me, I know like myself, what I would do with clients and like what I wouldn't do with clients, but it just seems cruel to kind of put ourselves out there as if we're mental health counselors when, a lot, and by the way, a lot of this stuff is very damaging to people's mental health. I mean, this program was rough for me. I mean, I've been pretty unhappy. And I've seen people like really, really destroyed, emotionally destroyed. I mean, the only reason I'm not is because I just keep my mouth shut and just kind of like go along. But when people really like gang up on you and, they call you names, racist, or like this or that or whatever, and then you have the professor adding to it, and you can start to like really question yourself. I mean, I've seen people not know how to handle like something like that, because you just never would expect it in a class. You just wouldn't expect all of these people just like come at you in like such a way. It can feel really overwhelming, and I don't think there's like any evidence that any of this is like good for anybody, like mentally or socially.
So have you seen, so I take it you've seen people try to stand up against some of these teachings,
Yeah.
and can you give an example of one story about what that looked like?
Yeah. So like, for example, I can talk a little bit about like group dynamics. I don't know if you've taken that yet, but it's like very experiential. So it's kind of like we're in a group together and we're doing like the practice. And, I recall like some guy, push back. I mean, just mildly push back. And it was just like everyone all on top of him, just, and in that like really condescending way, where like, you just don't know enough yet. Like, we'll educate you. We'll tell you what the right thing is. But if you don't actually say, okay, I agree or whatever, like that's where like it gets a little bit more aggressive, I'd say.
And this was mostly coming from students?
Yeah, it was coming from
Okay.
students, but I mean, it's definitely like sanctioned by the professors.
Mhm.
And it's really obvious to people. Like, I think it sends a message. So
Mhm.
people kind of learn what they can say and what they can't say, and like whether it's worth, pushing back on things. I think there's like this element where it's like kind of pretending to be this challenge and this discussion and stuff like that, but it's not a challenge if you already agree with it. It's only challenging the people that don't want to agree or
Mhm.
haven't agreed yet or whatever. And so
Mhm.
to me, it's like getting pushed down on people. It's not like a balance, dialogue of sorts. It's, I mean, it's brainwashing, to be totally honest, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. And it must be really traumatic for the person who gets humiliated like that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It truly is humiliating. I mean, in
Mhm.
the few times I've pushed back, and that's like
Mhm.
really mildly. I'm a
Mhm.
relatively shy person. But like we'll do breakout groups and stuff like that. And um, like say that the assignment says like, you need to think about this in this way, and like no one is willing to think about it in like the other way or whatever. So I'll
Mhm.
just like bring it up, and not even like I'm advocating for it, but just like this, if you want to look at it from this perspective, like this is what it would be or something.
Mhm.
And it's just like that fast. Like people will just like come at you so fast, and like you're just like, okay, like you just
Wow.
shut up, because there's this feeling that like it's just not worth it. You're just going to get emotionally destroyed. And people have been kicked out of my program. I wish I knew who they were,
Mm.
but people have been kicked out for not meeting the consciousness requirements, basically.
Wow. Okay. Gosh, I feel like I could talk to you all day long and hear more. And I I respect your time, and we both have other things we need to do. So we'll wrap up, but maybe we can talk again at some point. And it feels like you have really looked into this and tried to understand it as you've gone through it, and have a pretty deep understanding of not only what's happening, but why and how. So I really appreciate that perspective. Is there anything that I should have asked you, or that you want to bring up, or sum up with, or any other points that are really important, you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's just like a couple of things that I just want to like
Okay.
really briefly throw at
Yeah.
people, just for like their own curiosity and stuff. But there's this book, okay, it's called The Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. It's by Robert J. Lifton, and he does a study of, this is from like the 60s
Okay.
or maybe even the 50s, but actually no, it was the 60s. The like people who have gone through Maoist thought reform
Mhm.
camps.
Mm.
And you'll notice a lot of parallels. I've written down some things. So like, quote, the penetration of the psychological forces of the environment to the inner emotions of the individual person is perhaps the outstanding psychiatric fact of thought reform.
Mm.
So take that for what it is. There's definitely, some elements of that, but there's also like common themes that he picked up on. So like number one would be like milieu control. So like controlling information and communication, demand for purity. So black and white thinking, inducing guilt and shame, confession, if you confess your sins as defined by the group, there's no confidentiality. The leaders will discuss and exploit your sharing, your attitudes, your faults, whatever. Like it'll be exploited, or it can be exploited, I guess I should say. Sacred science, the group's doctrine or ideology is the ultimate truth beyond questioning or dispute.
Yeah.
Loading the language, so you use jargons where words and phrases are used in new ways. They're outside, like the outside world wouldn't understand. So I think we like talked about that a little bit, what multicultural means to the average person versus what it means to somebody in the program or like already, conscientized. Doctrine over person, so members' personal experiences subordinated to the ideology, and any contrary experiences must be denied or reinterpreted to fit the ideology of the group. And dispensing of existence, so not necessarily like literally, but like that those that don't conform, or like don't have adequate consciousness or enlightenment, have no credibility and they have to be rejected. So, and it's really not like a coincidence, because there's a really prominent educator, and I won't like speak too much about it, but I just encourage everybody to look up Paulo Freire. He's a Marxist educator. He's very prominent in the social sciences. Gerald Wing Su very obviously pulls from him, and he actually like directly cites him. So I like, so not even speculation, he directly cites the pedagogy of the oppressed. But I mean, he straight up says like, oh gosh, what was it? It was like the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And he said this in the 70s. So he already knew what happened, but like the Chinese Cultural Revolution is like the most genial solution of the century. So that should like be
Gerald Wing Su said this, or Paulo Freire?
No, Paulo Freire. Yeah. So, but that should like give people some context, because Paulo Freire and like this Freirean method of education is, it's definitely like foundational, not just in the social sciences, but like in a lot of education now, but like especially for us, like anyone in education, social work, all of these things are definitely like pulling from him. And so the fact that he's looking at, like Maoist thought reform and like the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which is a horrific time for people. Tens of millions of people died. To look at that and call that the most genial solution of the century, and sort of like look at that like, okay, this is a great model of cultural revolution.
Right.
And then also be the foundation upon which our program and stuff like that is kind of built, and having all of these parallels between the stuff that you would see in other cultural revolutions, and then the experiences that we're personally going through. Obviously the depth, or like the seriousness is different, but like it's the same psychological process. So like for me, I really think about the stuff in terms of like the underlying psychological processes that are going on. So I do recommend that book. And I also recommend, it's by Matias Desmet. It's called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Very interesting. I think those two books are really useful for any therapists or psychologists or social workers who listen to this and have some curiosity about maybe some of those like psychological elements of thought reform and like thought control.
Yeah, if you'll send me the titles and authors, I'll put them in the notes under the video so that people can look this up. Yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Gosh, thank you so much for your time and for sharing these experiences. I'm continually blown away by the striking contrast between what they're teaching and what classical person-centered counseling should look like. It's such a stark contrast. And it's interesting to hear your experiences. One of the things that I keep hearing is, oh, you're experiencing this because you went to a school that's really out there, like really radical. But I'm hearing this from all over the US and all over the UK as well. People are chiming in to say these are experiences that I'm having in my program as well. So thanks.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because that's how I thought. I thought this must just be like a, my program specific thing. So it's really, I think, edifying to see you, like you really, I mean, your discussions and stuff like that were very, very helpful for me, because it kind of like clicked that like, wow, this is not just a me problem. This is not just a my school problem. And like going through the comments and seeing everything that people said, it's terrifying, but it is interesting, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.